Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I know many of you are tuning in from all over the world, which is great today. Thanks for joining us for our webinar on the bridge from diversity to inclusion and how EQ can help bridge the gap. Today's webinar is hosted by TalentSmart EQ, and for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the world's premier provider of emotional intelligence training, assessments, certification, and coaching. We've been in business for almost 20 years, and everything that we do is all centered around the niche of emotional intelligence. Many of you may also be familiar with our book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, authored by Dr. Travis Bradberry, Dr. Gene Greaves. It's a best-selling book, almost 3 million copies sold, and you might have come across that in a Hudson News store or Barnes & Noble or any major book retailer, so you may be familiar with us in that regard. Before we get started today, I do want to take care of a few quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar will run for approximately a little over 35 minutes. We will be answering questions at the end of today's webinar. So at any point today, if you do have questions, you will see on the right-hand side of your screen your GoToWebinar panel. And there is where you will have the ability to adjust your audio and your video settings. And then you will also see that field that says questions and a small arrow right next to that. So at any time throughout today's webinar that you do have questions, feel free to click on that little arrow and type your question in. We will be devoting a portion at the end of the webinar to address as many of those questions as we can for you. Additionally, today's webinar will be recorded, so anybody who hops on late or who has to hop off early, no worries. You'll all receive a recording to the email that you registered with, and you'll get that about 1 hour after we close out the webinar. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And additionally, we will be providing a survey, a feedback survey at the end of the webinar that will just populate on screen once we close out. We really appreciate that feedback here at TalentSmart EQ. It helps us continue to be able to create these webinars and make sure that they're educational, insightful, enriched content for everyone. So we really do appreciate that feedback. It's about 5 quick questions. So I believe that wraps up the majority of our housekeeping items here. I would love to introduce our team, and then we can go ahead and get started. My name is Kate Barsby. I am the Director of Marketing here at TalentSmart, and I will be in the driver's seat today as our chauffeur or our technical producer, if you want to call it that as well. Joining us will be Sue DeLazzaro, and Sue is our Vice President of Programs at TalentSmart EQ, and she'll be our tour guide or subject matter expert today. I am actually tuning in from sunny San Diego, and Sue is joining us from the East Coast. Hello, Sue. Can you hear me okay? And why don't you give a quick introduction to yourself for everyone?
Yes, hi, Kate. Thank you for having me. And everyone, thanks for joining. I'm very excited to be here. I'm joining from Maryland, and I'm very excited to get started. It's a great time.
Wonderful. So why don't we go ahead and share with everyone what we're going to discuss in today's webinar on how EQ can help bridge the gap from diversity to inclusion.
Okay, thanks, Kate. So I'm happy to be here. Today we're going to be exploring how EQ can help bridge the gap from diversity to inclusion. If you think of today's discussion, or if you think about today, you know, wherever your organization is at, if you've taken important steps to achieve diversity, or if you're in the middle of that process, today is really about how do you bridge from diversity to adding skills to achieve a more inclusive culture. That takes skill. That's the bridge that we're going to be talking about. And we've picked out some emotional intelligence skills that can help you have an inclusive culture. So specifically, I'll be talking about how to enable empathy for others, how to deepen trust among people, and facilitate personal accountability when a difficult moment or interaction happens. They will definitely happen, so how do we prepare for them? All 3 of these things that you see here on screen are courageous behaviors, and they require being able to be aware of our feelings and also manage them well. They also require being aware of other people's feelings and responding to those as well. So they require emotional intelligence skills, and today's webinar is going to walk you through how your supervisors, managers, leaders, and staff should be equipped with EQ skills to create a culture of inclusion. So I'll start with touching on why both diversity and inclusion are important. And for those new to EQ, as I'm sure some of us are, we'll take a very high level walkthrough about EQ to make sure we're all on the same page. And with that, Kate, I think it would be good to understand where our listeners are currently on both topics. Would you be okay with a quick poll?
Sure, that sounds great,
Okay.
Sue. And for everyone attending today, Sue used the term emotional intelligence as well as diversity and inclusion. So just keep in mind that when we use those two terms, we use them interchangeably, but they do mean the same thing. So just know that when we speak about diversity, or I'm sorry, when we speak about emotional intelligence and EQ, we're talking about the same thing. So I'm going to launch a quick poll up on your screen here. You should all see this pop up momentarily, and please go ahead and select the response that resonates most with you. Is your organization already underway with any of the following? So please select whether it's emotional intelligence, diversity, inclusion, or maybe a combination of some sort of these. So I'm just going to give it another moment or two here, Sue, to let everyone select their response. I do see a lot of responses coming in, so thank you all. Looks like we are at the point now, almost everyone has responded. Thank you all. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll out, Sue, and actually share the results with everyone.
Okay.
We are actually seeing the largest number, a whopping 85% actually, are doing a combination of EQ, diversity, and inclusion with equal amounts at 7% focusing on EQ and diversity, and then a really small fraction focusing on inclusion.
Okay. Wow, that's great. So, wherever you're at, whatever you ended up answering here today, I think, and especially for the 85%, we're going to be providing you, I think, with some really good specifics. So wherever you're at, you will walk away with ideas. But EQ provides us with awareness, and it provides us with behaviors that we need to build an inclusive culture. And by that, we're talking intentional. It's a comfortable place. It's welcoming. There's curiosity, and it's supportive. So let's get started with this webinar, and we can get into the how a little bit. Okay, so why diversity and inclusion? So let's talk about what each of these things mean. So when I'm talking about diversity, this refers to the traits and the characteristics that make people unique. You can think about gender, religion, race, age, ethnicity, health, physical abilities, culture, sexual orientation, or education. And think about this using a metaphor of an iceberg where you can see some of the iceberg is just peeking above the water, and you can pick one or two of those things. Let's take age or race or gender. But that is at the very, very top, the part that's visible is at the very top, and these even visible things, they're so complex. And when we peer below the surface, we understand why. So characteristics like health, family, sibling order, things like that, you might not have any idea about an actual person until you get to know people better, and the majority is below the surface. Inclusion refers to behaviors and social norms that ensure that people feel welcome, nourished, encouraged to grow, and make friends and advance at work. The level of inclusion at an organization reflects how well diversity of voices is valued. The question is, do we include diverse people in what we do by our words and our actions?
It's a good question, Sue, and a really valid one. I think we can kind of get the idea of why diversity and inclusion, especially right now, but how do we connect EQ skills to these two initiatives?
Yep, great question. So if we look here at this tree and this slide, EQ is your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and in others. And it's your skill at using this awareness to manage yourself as well as your relationships. EQ is made up of the 4 skills that you see here on screen: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And a person that has high EQ is aware and behaves in a way that helps cultivate the type of environment that we would consider to be inclusive. Again, intentional, comfortable, welcoming, curious, and supportive. But EQ isn't in its own little vacuum. It's not the goal in this case. When you work to increase your emotional intelligence, so many other skills are going to strengthen and grow. And that's what we're showing here with this tree and all the leaves. When you're more aware of the feelings that can distract you, and you can take action to make sure you're not distracted, your time management improves. If you feel yourself getting tired or nervous and you stop to take care of yourself, your stress tolerance and your change tolerance will also improve. Those are just a couple of examples, but the point is that you really want to develop EQ skills so that you're better able to participate in life constructively for yourself and for everyone around you. And in the case of today, we're talking about how EQ, the role that EQ plays from diversity to inclusion. So we have some specific things that we want to talk about, and that's where this next phase of this webinar is going. We're going to concentrate on 3 of the leaves that you see here: empathy, trust, and accountability. So these 3 all play a role in creating a work environment where people with diverse backgrounds and characteristics and traits feel seen and heard and valued. That's the goal here. So let's go through some specifics, Kate.
Great. I think it would be a good idea, Sue, to actually give a real world example of this as we see diversity and inclusion in action. Additionally, everyone, I do see a lot of questions getting submitted. So just a reminder, feel free to continue typing those in and we'll circle back at the end of the webinar to address those.
Okay, thanks, Kate. All right, so to give us some grounding here in these skills, let's focus on a new hire by the name of Andrea. Andrea is going through her first couple of months as a new project manager at a large pharma company. The company has, very official onboarding processes. She's provided with all of the information she needs, all of the classes that she needs. She also knows about the company's reputation in the industry and is really delighted to see that the time and attention devoted to the company's support of diverse minds and skills and people. But privately, she can't help but wonder what the actual day-to-day is going to be like. She's a woman, she's a person of color, and the question that she's thinking in her mind is, will she actually feel included?
So, Sue, how would you, when we look at this scenario of Andrea as a new employee, how would we consider empathy to come in play with a new hire like her if people don't really even know her yet?
Yep. So let's talk about empathy first. And everyone, we're going to be sharing, I think, 3 or 4 points that are specifics that you can do. So if we talk about empathy, it requires a high degree of social awareness, which is one of those 4 EQ skills from a few slides back. To be empathetic, team members have to proactively learn where new team members are coming from. What's their story, their culture, their background, what's their personality, just to name a few. And as people get to know others, they begin to acknowledge their opinions and their feelings, and they're now making an effort to reach out to offer themselves to help. Empathy requires both understanding and action. So to take it a step further, think of empathy as truly stepping into the other person's shoes and understanding not just their point of view, but understanding it from their perspective, from their shoes, and not from yours. So for Andrea, her team's first steps could include taking some time to get to know her and let her get to know them. You know, maybe it's lunch or a Zoom chat that's designed just to get to know her better. And it can be fun, you know, it doesn't have to be so formal. But instead of waiting for Andrea to reach out to the team, it would be helpful if the team reached out to Andrea as well. I'm thinking of a little game that we play with new employees sometimes at Talent Smart, where it's kind of an older activity, but we like to share, you know, all of us, you know, what are 2 truths and 1 lie that's kind of fun, just to share a little bit about ourselves. It's kind of a creative and fun way to just get conversation going and to really have, you know, people be learning about one another.
That's true, Sue. We do actually have fun with that game. It gets a good amount of laughs too, so it gets people to open up in an environment where they might have felt a little bit uncomfortable opening up in another scenario. So it's a great way to just kind of establish some connections right off the bat. It kind of sounds like it's not really just the motions of small talk and going through those motions of small talk with new staff. That small talk actually kind of gives us a window into a new employee's world. And those are really what begin to actually help form genuine relationships.
Absolutely. And that's really what this 4th point is about here. You know, if you have a little bit of groundwork laid, you'll have just a little bit of time put in to start the foundation for the relationship. So when you see feelings and emotions surface, you can acknowledge them because you're not starting from scratch. Should we? Yeah, let's move on to trust. I think that covers everything for empathy. Okay, great. So we talked about empathy. Now let's move on to trust. Trust is one of those things that some people give openly until it's broken. And then there are other people who choose to withhold it, withholding trust until it's earned. And an inclusive culture would be the one where trust is given freely until there are reasons not to. So let's go back to Andrea, this example of this newer employee. Andrea attends a meeting and she's pleased to see that as a group, the team is prioritizing trust. They use their self-management skills to listen longer, you know, they're not cutting each other off. And, you know, the environment is a trusting one. And she could hear it in the phrases that they used with her. Here's an example. Andrea, will you tackle this spreadsheet? Thanks for working your magic. So this is showing open trust without having to earn it, which I think is really important. And by the way, in this meeting, it's not just about Andrea, but you know, there is a lot going on to make sure that everyone's feeling that the place is safe and it's trusting. So, you know, there might have some quieter members of the team. So they're calling on those quieter members and they're making sure that the time is balanced. So it's not just the talkative people that have the floor. Now, on less inclusive teams, newcomers, it's natural to easily feel that they're outsiders and that they don't have a voice until they're invited in. And studies show that people on these types of teams are much less likely to thrive. Low EQ words and low EQ actions create what are called microaggressions, which really lead newer team members to feel that they don't belong and they're not trusted.
That term microaggressions, Sue, it sounds pretty intimidating. What would you, I think it would be good to kind of give everyone an example of what you would consider to be a microaggression that we might hear at work.
Yeah. So the first the first kind of example that showed trust was, "Hey, Andrea, will you tackle this spreadsheet? Thanks for working your magic." Those are high EQ words that are kind of said freely before the task is done. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, low EQ words that would just feel terrible could sound something like this. "Andrea, here's a spreadsheet for you. Let's see if you have it in you. And by the way, don't screw it up for the rest of us." That feels heavy and bad. Someone might make a statement like that thinking they're being funny, but it's really not. You can feel how those words, that choice, hold the power to really either deepen a relationship or just destroy the idea of building trust over time.
Totally, Sue, as well as completely unmotivating and quite sarcastic. A lot of people don't necessarily understand the sense of sarcasm that others might be conveying. So using a statement like that is not motivating, and even if somebody's joking around, it just doesn't come off well, and it won't be received well because you really don't know how it will land. So it's best to really just avoid it, because those are definitely low EQ words. Now, we talked about empathy and this piece of deepening trust over time, but
Yeah.
What about accountability, Sue? You mentioned earlier that accountability is also a big piece that kind of helps bridge the gap from diversity to inclusion.
Sure. So in our next slide here, so the accountability piece is the third piece we're talking about today. And to illustrate it, let's go back to Andrea. And I'd like to share part of her onboarding story that maybe wasn't as smooth as we would have liked. So even coworkers and teams that practice trust and empathy can be prone to mistakes. And sometimes even people with good intentions, they just make choices that land wrong. So here's the story. Andrea arrives to join her first monthly project management meeting, and she listened as key players shared progress, numbers, and challenges, and the next milestones. And when the discussion got to the topic of mobilizing a number of action teams and the need to recruit more talent, specifically more Gen Zers, they began to direct questions to Andrea, but nothing about the project content. Their intention was to learn from their newest team player, but really they just made her feel uncomfortable. They ignored her expertise, her experience, her perspective on the work, and assigned her the role of expert on recruiting Gen Z women of color, which she had no background in. She's not a recruiter. So the team had built enough early trust with Andrea that she actually said something. She felt okay pointing out what had just happened. She asked if she could share that they were making her feel one-dimensional and one in which she had very little to share. As a result, one of the team members acknowledged that she made a great point and apologized on behalf of the team, while another team member assured her that they would try to be more considerate by asking her if she knew anything about a certain topic first. And they moved on from there, from the meeting. So working on being emotionally intelligent, it doesn't mean doing everything perfectly all the time. It's really about continuous improvement through practice. And when a team has built trust over time and the team members have self-awareness and self-management, these will allow them to make their own mistakes by acknowledging them, genuinely apologizing versus lashing out or brushing it off or joking or withdrawing into an awkward silence. And instead having an open conversation to understand more clearly what the mistake was. So that's where the vulnerability comes into play with all of this. It takes courage to show weakness. It takes courage to step up. It also takes courage to show the weakness. So allowing Andrea, who's new, someone they hardly know, to help them catch themselves with a little uncomfortable feedback is exactly what it takes to achieve accountability. And although feedback can sometimes sting, it's ultimately the best way to build a more inclusive and welcoming culture. This team actually helped Andrea relax by hearing her, owning their part, and reassuring that they'll work to do better.
Definitely, Sue, this last point that you made here for lean into your discomfort, this is actually a skill that we at Talent Smart EQ actually practice quite often. We talk about it quite often, that it's definitely, it's also one of the strategies in our book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. We talk about leaning into your discomfort a lot, because that is kind of where you can really start to, be open with others, to show that vulnerability, to be comfortable with your successes as well as your mistakes, and to have accountability, to be empathetic, and to build trust. I think now we are right at about just after the 25-minute mark, Sue. So I'd love to begin wrapping things up a bit, so we definitely have some time to take some questions.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let's sum up here. Love this bridge. So EQ skills will facilitate more empathy, trust, and better accountability in your organization. And we see these as a bridge, and that's why they're in the middle. Once you have a diverse team or workforce, how will you achieve a culture of inclusion? We believe that helping your staff, your managers, your leaders develop their emotional intelligence skills will actually help them build their empathy, their ability to trust, and know how to take accountability when they should. These course corrections, they require overcoming feelings of discomfort and are so important. This whole part in the middle is really about emotions. So to bring it all together, and I love this picture, EQ better equips people to create a welcoming work environment. All employees, every single one, have a role in making others feel seen, feel heard, and valued. And EQ gives people ways to be aware in the moment, to value understanding other people around you, and to work through uncomfortable feelings constructively. This will help really foster a culture of inclusion.
Thanks, Sue. That was a great wrap up. This is a topic that is, so important now more than ever. I've seen a bunch of questions actually that have come in and been submitted throughout the webinar today. So we know that this is definitely a topic of a lot of relevance. Also, this is actually one of our highest attended webinars. So we know that this is a topic that definitely is important right now. So I would love to take the time, Sue, and answer some of the questions that have been submitted by our audience, if that's okay with you.
Yes, please, we'll do my best.
Great. The first question that has been submitted that I think is actually a good one to start with was, does EQ help prevent bias or unconscious bias?
Okay, so being emotionally intelligent does not mean that you're immune from all of the influences that create bias, whether they're conscious or not. What EQ does is, I think, it opens your heart and your mind to being more aware of when these influences surface, and give you the skill of being the one to say something or do something constructive in the moment, rather than chasing the comfortable thing to say or do. So if we stick with the bridge metaphor for a sec, I think people really do need skills to deal with and handle the emotions and the feelings that surface, all that stuff in the middle of the bridge. Because, feelings and emotions trigger habits that keep cultures in the status quo. But EQ skills are critical for really overcoming habits and creating more welcoming workplaces. So I think being emotionally intelligent, it doesn't really mean that you're immune from bias, but it makes you aware of them so that you can do something to move from them, so you don't stay stuck in the bias.
Great, thank you. Another question that has been submitted was, we spoke about accountability, trust, and empathy as, three key skills that touch on diversity and inclusion and building that feeling of inclusion. Are these the ones that should be focused on, and the only ones that are really the important ones that you should be focusing on, that are, obviously connect very closely to emotional intelligence? That's a good question.
It's a good question, and there's a fast answer. The answer is no. There are many more skills to work on. If you think about, I think those are three of the big ones, but there's certainly more. So, if you think about that that example of microaggressions a couple of minutes ago, when I think about microaggressions, I'm thinking about communication skills and being aware of tone and word choice, or interpersonal skills are also needed. So, when do you say hello to someone, or how do you find out the correct way to pronounce someone's name? Think about assertiveness and just that stepping out of yourself to do something that's important. Knowing how to read a room, knowing how much space you take up in that room, your tolerance for change, your sharp listening skills. All of these things honestly would make my list for skills that are important to an inclusive environment. So it's a long list. It doesn't stop at empathy, trust, and accountability, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good summary. So I think it's empathy, trust, and accountability were the big ones that we focused on today. However, a lot of the other skills that you saw on that tree slide that we shared earlier in the webinar, they're all skills that definitely are at play here when it comes to emotional intelligence and developing your EQ, and how that helped bridge the gap from diversity inclusion. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay.
Another question. Yeah, another question that was submitted, Sue, was the slide on trust really jumped out to me because I work on a team of 7 people and 3 of us were hired just within the last year. We communicate daily, but in the remote environment, and it doesn't necessarily feel like we've really built up the same degree of trust that I've experienced in the past with teams in person. We meet deadlines, we're all fairly friendly, but beyond that, there's not really any sense of deeper bonding. What would you recommend we do virtually to help grow that sense of empathy or trust? That's a really good question, Sue. We've gotten this questions that relate to this virtual environment so much lately. We've pretty much been in a year of, having to pivot quickly and do things virtual. So it was a learning curve, I think, for many industries, many types of job roles, many leaders, everyone, truly. So, any tips that you can share, Sue, to really help do that successfully and help kind of create that sense of empathy and trust on the virtual level, I think would be really helpful for everyone today.
Yeah. I was actually watching the Today Show today, and I'm thinking about a past webinar that we've done, and I can't remember the topic, but it all centered around what I'm about to just say, which is our virtual world really has removed the idea of small talk and informal chatting to just relax together a little bit in between the work. And that time is incredibly useful to really understanding other people, having them understand you. So whether you do one-on-ones or group hangouts, or you schedule, this sounds funny, but you schedule a meeting just to hang out, whether it's a happy hour or some type of socializing. I do think there's a really important place for that. And it's funny, I'm thinking of a friend who at her organization actually has a mandated socializing hour. But if you talk about work, you have to drop $1 in a Venmo account or something like that, which makes it kind of funny. But just staying focused on the non-work so that you can really learn and appreciate and listen, I think is certainly helpful. So all the things we used to do in the hallway, there's really a point to it. That's the point.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sue. A lot of times we have, kind of discussed like that water cooler talk or, stopping at somebody's door to say hi, ask how their weekend was. I feel like now more than ever, we realize how important that is to
Yep.
building, a positive culture, a inclusive culture where people understand one another, they acknowledge one another and respect one another. Uh, and doing that on the virtual level in like some of the ideas that you shared, be it maybe it's just a meeting, a scheduled virtual meeting that purely just is the opportunity for people to just chat and it's not work related. They can kind of just enjoy one another. We at Talent Smart EQ actually started doing that a little bit, and we did a few virtual happy hours, and every single time after we had them, everyone was just so appreciative because we said, it's so nice just to be able to enjoy one another and to it's not all work all the time, but we're not together in person. So the ability to kind of just catch up with each other as people, not just in coworkers, is really important.
Yep. No, 100%.
Definitely. Yeah. Another question. This is actually a really good follow-up question to this is I want to know my coworkers beyond just knowing them as employees, but I want to know them as people. I don't want to cross a line that really offends them or could come off as stepping over a boundary. In terms of being empathetic and building trust, like you mentioned with my coworkers, what do you consider to be that line? And how do you know what is appropriate to ask? What areas you can kind of venture to as a topic of conversation if you want to be open to them and you want them to be open with you? And do you have any suggestions for really how to weigh that line and find a good balance?
Yep. So relationships are built over time and through many interactions over time. So that I think is the first thing to recognize, even though, we're kind of working virtually and all of that stuff, relationships still take time. So social awareness skills can help you in the early stages of getting to know people. Things like greeting people by name or listening well, being attentive and present when someone is speaking, that's all part of building trust, I think. Getting to know someone better is certainly going to vary according to the person you're trying to get to know. It would be difficult for me to share a specific set of topics that are okay to ask about because people are all different. Some people want to be asked about their weekends, some don't, as an example. But if you don't know and you don't have a sense of what is okay for the other person, then my suggestion would be to just observe and listen. Listen to this person for a couple of days or even a couple of weeks to get you to the answer to what is correct for this person. The person's almost leading you to the answer, if you take the time to observe them. So that would be my thought there. If you're talking with this person and you're getting kind of some vague answers or something, that might be a clue to not push farther, to give it a little more time. And, maybe that's a sign that you're approaching a boundary. But this is really where social awareness skills can be understood as being a nuanced skill. You're not just following steps, but it really kind of depends on the person that you're dealing with. Maybe the person who is vague with you is vague because there was someone else on the Zoom call kind of within earshot and they would have preferred to not share specifics with that person there. So that's just a little tiny example of how, it's not just a totally clear-cut answer. But finding a good balance is something that you can do, and it'll take time. And if you're comfortable doing this, you can even ask someone what they prefer, and what they're comfortable with. You can always make You can always make a mistake and say you're sorry. And, I think that that goes a long way as well. So I think people appreciate that. I think it makes us human. So this is a really long answer, but I think overall, don't put too much pressure on yourself to know exactly what all the steps are going to be. I'd say observe and focus on the next step. And that's how you'll get to know each of your coworkers better. So hopefully that's some kind of guideline that can help you find your next step.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Sue, because I think a really, if you get one big thing from this webinar today, I think it's also that EQ it's a skill, as we shared. It's a moving target. So you're constantly in development mode and developing your EQ. And like you shared, you're gonna make mistakes. That's what makes you vulnerable. You can acknowledge those mistakes and just kind of, I think, really understanding that you don't need to be perfect. But especially in this scenario, how do you understand what that boundary is with people? A lot of times they do actually kind of lead you to the answer of what's comfortable and what's not. So I like that point that you shared. We have received a number of questions, Sue, that have come in. So we really do appreciate everyone providing all of those questions in that question box. We are right just past the 40-minute mark. So we do need to wrap up today's webinar. Again, as I had shared, you all will receive the recording of today's webinar via email, and you will be receiving that to the email that you registered with in about 1 hour. Additionally, we have noted all of the questions and have logged them. So if you would like somebody to follow up with you regarding your question, feel free just to make a note of that in the comment section of the survey that will populate in a moment or two. We'll be happy to have an expert at Talent Smart EQ follow up with you regarding that question. And additionally, I did want to just let everyone know today, Sue, that we do have an article on this topic on emotional intelligence, the bridge from diversity and inclusion. So feel free just to click that link and it will take you to that article. And then additionally, on our website, we do have our next upcoming webinar listed that you can register for. It's a free webinar just like this one, so feel free to register for that if you're interested in as well. That's on EQ and the power of feedback. And as I had shared, we do have other webinars in the recording section there. So feel free to check any of those out that you'd like to. And then additionally, we have over 300 articles on our website all about various topics. So along the lines of this topics, from the bridge to diversity and inclusion, we have articles purely just on the topic of how to build empathy and build your empathy muscles. So feel free to check that out as well. And just as another quick reminder, that webinar on the power of feedback taking place in March will be with Dr. Jean Greaves. She is a co-founder of Talent Smart EQ and the co-author of that book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that I had mentioned at the beginning. So, Sue, I'd love to just thank you for, really sharing your expertise today on this topic. I think it's an important one, and we hope everyone really found value in the content that we covered today, and we hope you all attend one of our future webinars.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kate. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, you as well. We hope you all have a great remainder of your morning, afternoon, or evening. And be sure to keep an eye out for that recording and provide that feedback for us. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.